Dr. Michael McAfee, if you could come back up, Michael. Dawn O'Neill, join us back on stage. Professor Karen Malone. May I introduce to you Professor Emeritus Dorothy Scott will be joining us on stage for this particular panel. Dorothy is at the forefront of policy and practice. She's been so for 40 years or so, working with children and families at the highest levels of government. She's giving an address tomorrow called Identity, Integrity and Inspiration, the self at the centre of service, and she joins us on the... There you are. How could you have been doing it for 40 years when you only look 23? I'm good, aren't I? Look who's joining us. The Deputy Mayor, Jeremy Ball. Come on, Jeremy. Now, Jeremy's all right. He can come up because obviously you are at the push of helping make Launceston the child-friendly community that UNICEF and UNESCO and...
That's right.
President Obama wants. And he also has a degree in drama, so every answer has to be entertaining. Is that okay? Right, now, people have put things in the box to ask of questions. I shall rove with the microphone also, so that those of you who wish to ask questions standing up are able to do so. But I thought it might be interesting, just to kick it off, because we do have some time till 4:30, so we've got maybe, say, 45 minutes or so, just to put our speakers into context, because a number of the questions that have come through in the box have basically had a tone of, well, not a lot of them, but some of them, and they deserve to be addressed, given that I have learned how to ignite conflict. Basically, how would you know? How would you know? How would you know what we do on the ground? Have you ever been hungry? Have you ever been in pain? Have you walked this talk that is so much a part of the rhetoric and the data and the presentations that we have worked today? So why don't we just throw all the education and the learning and the layered experience, put it to one side, and go into what I have learned is called the Jungian shadow. Where does it come from? Where does the passion in our people come from? So Dawn, I thought maybe we could start with you. I mean, you've got the most extraordinary credentials, been CEO of Lifeline, Beyond Blue, all of that information and data. What was your education? What were your formative experiences? Do you come from the silver spoon? Is this something that, you know, you're some sort of compassionate do-gooder who sips Chardonnay and looks and says, I really must help the poor little people? Or, you know, like, what's your story?
My fantasy life. Oh. Wow, good save.
Degree of difficulty 4.9. Igniting conflict. That is your punishment.
Very good.
Go on, blonde, answer the question.
Is that working? Can you hear me?
Can we put Don on, please, Sam?
Working?
Oh, you've got to turn it on.
I've got to turn it on. Oh, important thing. Does anyone know how to do that?
We'll take that one. Okay, I'll take this one. No, unfortunately, didn't grow up easily. I had one of those difficult families. My father was, like Andrew described, was one of those impossible people. And I didn't really understand that, and that kind of created all sorts of conflict in me, the shadow side. And then I decided it was all too hard, and I left school at 15, had almost no education because I'd been very naughty in school and didn't really attend very much. I was one of those waggers. I was a very bad girl. I fit a lot of those profiles that Andrew talked about, the naughty one. And I went travelling around the world 3 years, ended up in America, traced down this aunt, Auntie Marie in California. And as we got chatting, she mentioned in the conversation her mother. And then I started thinking, her mother, that means my grandmother. No one had ever told me I had a grandmother. I didn't know I had a grandmother. Never been mentioned. And I possibly had asked somewhere along the way, but never asked the question. So this was my father's mum. Never met her. Anyway, she said, oh yeah, she's still alive. She's in a mental asylum somewhere in Queensland. I was floored. Came back to Australia, thought, I've got to find this lady. Found her, she was 87, in Roma, in outback Queensland. She'd been in an institution for more than 40 years. Was the result why my dad was a little messed up. Lots of mental illness in the family. And that began me on a lifelong journey to try to understand mental illness, the impact it has on families and people, and what can we do to improve the system and the supports around people who experience trauma in early childhood, live with the consequences of mental illness, etc., etc., etc. That's how I ended up where I am.
Extraordinary. Amazing story. Thank you for telling us, because I know that's personal and this is a professional development conference, but sometimes sharing the personal helps put the professional into a, it's not, it gives it a more of a legitimacy, I guess, because it informs it with your emotional motivations. And I don't know, I'm not expecting everyone to have a story that, an Oprah-esque kind of story, but I am interested, Karen, what motivated you to go this way, to put so much work and effort that yours is on, that's on. Should be on. Let me just have a look. There you go, the red. There you go.
Okay, no. Jeez. Hello, yeah, I'm working now, thank you. It's really interesting because I had a very difficult childhood. I grew up in a housing estate, in public housing, had a difficult and challenging family. And in fact, my way of dealing with that from a very young age was to go to this place that I used to call my special place. And it was a little bit of leftover, rough and tumble land where there was a creek. And I used to go and sitting there, usually by myself, and just spend it as a place to sort of a refuge, really, from what I saw as, things that were going on in my house. And I used to visit it regularly till the age of 15.
Did it have an imagination element for you, like a faraway tree kind of thing?
Yeah, it did. And I used to talk to the birds, and I came to know it like it was my family, really. And I got to know the changes in the weather, the seasons, how the trees change. It became a really intimate relationship. And it was really important because my brothers, who were also in the same family, didn't really, survive so well. They had a lot of challenges in later life. And I sort of left, when I was 15, I sort of roamed, also left home early. And I came back to university very late in life, 2 young children, single parent, and started doing my PhD. And my PhD was with an offensive industry, looking at offensive industries on public housing in western suburbs of Melbourne. And when
what does that mean?
Like high polluting
industries.
Yep.
Yep.
And I started to work with these kids, and I realised that they were experiencing similar things to me. And it sort of hit me then, and the preface to my PhD has the poem that I wrote when I was 15, when I was leaving this special place. And I dedicated my PhD to that child, really, was that my whole life's journey has been about the importance of children having that place. Now, it doesn't have to be a natural place, it doesn't have to be, but they need someone or something, somewhere to go when other things in their lives are not working well. And I suppose that's always been my driver.
Yeah, and furnished your imagination and furnished your drive to create that. Gosh, it all happens in childhood, doesn't it? It all happens in childhood, that whole formative thing. Jeremy, don't think you're getting off lightly. Come on.
What am I doing here?
We'll go across to Michael.
There's no hidden cameras.
No hidden cameras. No. Michael, what's your story? Like, I know you shared a little bit of it with us earlier, that you're a troublemaker and sit up the back of the bus and need to feel like you're on actually outside your comfort zone in order to feel like you're doing your best work. When you stand up here and you talk about the utopia of collaboration and doing the work and getting your best efforts, where does this come from within you in terms of living it? Did that make sense?
It makes sense. It comes from the fact that I don't like that comes, the collaboration stuff now comes from the fact that I actually am not a collaborative person. I'm a highly type A person. I hate working with people. I'm highly judgmental. I really am. But the reality is this, I understand though that if I want to deliver on results, that's the price I got to pay. And so I've learned to grow up, develop the skills to do the work. I come out of a codependent family. My dad was an alcoholic, violent at times. Mother was codependent. Foster brothers and sisters always through the house. And my escape was just being outside playing all the time. And so I lived in both worlds. My parents took me out of public school when they started busing desegregation in the States in the 70s, put me in a private school. So during the day I went and was basically around a bunch of white folks that I had nothing in common with, and then I came back to be with black folks at night. That's where I lived, in both of those worlds. And so I grew up a lot of anger, a lot of seeing that I could have some opportunity, but actually not having a blueprint of how to get there and stumbling my way through it. And so the passion comes from now, the fact that there's a lot of fight in me because I got where I was by fighting to get there.
Yeah.
And then it's also because I understand how many of us take these opportunities that we've got for granted, quite frankly. Like I said, when I go home, when I literally went home for Thanksgiving, my nephew is on house arrest. I'm trying to help him. I'm going to send him to the University of Kansas basketball camp. He actually can't go because he had an ankle bracelet on. And I know right now that probably in 3 years he'll probably be in jail because now he's 14. Schools keep kicking him out. He's literally been kicked out of school 6 or 7 times this year. And instead of anyone giving him any counseling or anything, they send him back home to my sister, who isn't the greatest of mothers, and just say, put him on house arrest. So this work is very real to me. All I got to do is sit on my mother's couch and just watch folks come and go. And that is who I am as well. So it's not like I'm absent from it. It is who I am too. And I have to live with that. And so the work is real. Fighting to get somewhere, to me, has been a real journey. I know that you can get there. I know how hard it is. And so I carry that anger with me. In my younger years, the anger was, I just wanted to change the world, so I thought if I was right, I could make people do stuff. I got fired in Kansas City for doing that. I realized I can't. And so that meant that I had to humble myself enough to learn how to lead in a way that was effective. Fortunately, I went into the military when I was 17. My parents signed for me to go, went to basic training, came back, finished my senior year, went to advanced camp, then went to the university.
Thank you, Michael. Dorothy, 40 years. Can't believe it.
Hi, yeah.
Hi.
I was born in Wales in a working class family, and we immigrated to Australia when I was 4, which was in 1956, so you can work out. I'm on the wrong side of 60. And I guess there are a lot of influences. As a young adolescent, I turned up almost by accident at the YWCA, and there was an inspiring young Melbourne University social work student who was leading the girls group, and I must have been 13, and she just opened our eyes to what was happening in the world around us, took us up to the university on open day. I understood then what she was doing and committed herself to. It's Di O'Neill from St Luke's, the mother of strength-based practice in this country. And so when I was 14 or 15, there was a call at my local school to help children in the local children's home, which was really a reception centre to which all children brought into state care in Victoria were brought by women police back then. With their literacy and numeracy, and I couldn't believe that in my own neighbourhood there were children in such a place. And so I worked there as a childcare worker when I finished school, but then I committed myself to doing what I could in my lifetime to stopping children coming into state care and improving it for children who did come into state care.
So it's that whole notion of random opportunity for people that you meet along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I am semi-retired, and the highlight of my week is doing voluntary work with kids in local schools around numeracy and literacy, trying to give back a little bit. But even during my academic time as a professor of social work, I would spend my sabbatical leave working in non-government agencies to get back connected to where I was when I was a young social worker in child welfare and in mental health, and trying to understand and walk beside people in those contexts and situations.
So, Jeremy, when you hear that in the context of what we've all heard today, your work to help make Launceston a more child-friendly place, where does that push come from in council, in local government?
Well, I guess I introduced that notion because, for me, the lives of children are pretty critical. And I know from my own childhood. We were sort of, I was born in Australia but raised in England, and then we were kind of uprooted suddenly when I was 8, and I didn't know why, and plonked here with no other family. So I've always been an outsider, and I suppose for me, you said it was, I was an actor for a while, but which is, you're never wealthy when you're an actor, but through my own circumstances and various things that were going on in my own life, I ended up in Scotland at one point with no money at all, in that sense of actually, you're sleeping rough, you're on the edge of the edge. And then you get the job, you get the money, you find the bloke who'll give you cash in hand work as a painter, and suddenly you've got 40 quid in your pocket, and you've got a roof, and you've got food. And the job I did before Deputy Mayor was actually devising an employment program for migrants and refugees, because I know what it's like to be on the outside, and once you get work, you're in the society, you're in the culture, things can start going for you. So for me, in this city, we've got pockets of real disadvantage. And I see those children on the street with their parent or parents, and they're doing it so tough. They're in chaos, they're in deep chaos. They've got deep stress and deep trauma, you can see it. And for me, it's like, well, how can we let another day go past where we are not prioritising them? Because, as Michael said, we can do this. We can do this. We just need to put it up the list and start working together. So that's kind of where that drive comes from.
So now the question is up to you. Now that you've met our panel on the inside, because they presented to you from the outside today and showed you what they'd learned, now you know them a little bit better on the inside. Is that better? Do you know where everyone's coming from? Yeah, thank you. It's so easy, isn't it, just to have, we've got academics and speakers and rhetoric and data and statistics, and you guys are on the ground, you're doing it. Sometimes we need that personal connection in order to, move it forward just an extra little bit. Here's a question from the box, and then I'll go to the floor, hey? What difference, might be for you, Jeremy, to start. Might be for you, Karen. Someone has to put their hand up. What difference will being a child-friendly city make to the families many of us work with who struggle with poverty, mental health issues, unemployment, etc.? Who wants to start?
I'll just do a quick preface, simply to say one of the reasons that it really attracted me for us to get on this journey of a child-friendly city is the data. So if I go in and counsel and I argue that we need to invest more in community development, or we need to invest more or be more proactive in working in socio-economically disadvantaged areas, where's my evidence? Now, what I really like about the child-friendly cities journey is you get the data. You can map well-being, you can map disadvantage. And then if you've got these big red dots glowing on your city map and you're seeing how they trend, then you can start saying, we have a situation. Now make a decision whether you want to do something about it or not. And let's have that conversation. But let's not pretend we haven't got a situation, because we have. And that's what gives us that evidence-based argument.
Karen?
Yeah, and I'd like to say, once it gets to City Council, the great thing about child-friendly cities that I've seen is that it creates an umbrella that brings people to the table who wouldn't ordinarily believe that they have anything to do with children. I'm the infrastructure man. Why would I need to be thinking about children and families? I'm the guy who builds the roads. I'm the guy who, cleans up the park. They're just annoying because they leave rubbish around. So why those people are there and creating an umbrella where everyone has an investment across the City Council to realise that everything we do in our community is impacting and affecting and influencing in a positive or a negative way children's lives is really the key to make things become a holistic, systemic change.
Which is what you were saying, Michael.
Yeah.
You were saying that you are the work, that you might think that it's someone else's problem, but actually you're the one doing it. I'm sorry to distill what you said into such... Is that right?
That's right. No, that is right. To me, I believe that if you are going to do this work, it starts by those things. It's amazing when you focus energy, what begins to happen and organize around it. And so I think that is our job as leaders, just like you're saying right now. When you can begin to focus that attention, it's amazing what just that little spark does. And so that's why I believe that.
Does anyone want to supplement this conversation from the floor? Are there any... Did you want to add to it, Dawn? Shall we go to the next? Is there a further question that I can take? Or shall I keep going from the box? Money or the box? Come on, tell me. Box? All right. Question for panel. Are we really child friendly is the question mark. We now have, what's the long one? We now have safe at home legislation purported to be the safest law to respond to domestic violence in the country. How do we, as a community, protect the rights of children in violent families? Children still need to rely on a protective parent or community member to voice their experience. What if that parent can't through fear, or that community agency or person says the voice of the child is not strong enough? The child's voice is not enough evidence to take action. How do we truly enact safe at home legislation to keep children safe? How do we convince them that if they break the silence and give voice to their fear, that the community will keep them safe at home? Yeah, I knew it was coming to you.
Well, it's a very difficult challenge because this is where the legal system and the community come together, and there will be certain types of legal intervention, whether it's in the civil or criminal domain, that will require a certain level of evidence. So this is tough stuff if we're talking after children have been exposed to violence, either directly being assaulted themselves or witnessing family violence. I think that we need to think about this as a public health approach, which moves from primary prevention, which is fundamentally about changing social attitudes and behaviour that make violence and violence in the home particularly unacceptable, through to addressing at that primary prevention level what might be provoking or triggering factors. And certainly the Victorian data suggests that in half of family violence, police call-outs, alcohol misuse is a precipitating factor. It's not to say that that explains family violence, it's a powerful contributing factor. And so again, at the primary prevention level, we know what the evidence is about reducing alcohol harm around minimum pricing, a ban on advertising, volumetric taxing, all the things that politically are very difficult until the community is prepared to accept those measures and not see them as a nanny state intervention. So we'd start at the primary prevention area around family violence and children being exposed to family violence. Then we'd move on to a secondary prevention approach, is what can we do when we respond to families where there may be indications of a problem, but it hasn't yet reached a level where the power of the state and the coercive powers of the state need to be brought to bear. And so that's about really early intervention and response. In all of our children's services, being aware of children who are vulnerable in that way, but also in our adult services, drug and alcohol, homelessness, mental health, family violence services themselves, which I must say have come a long, long way in terms of being child sensitive. So that those services are building their capacity to respond early in the life of family violence. And then there is the third level, or the tertiary level, which is where you do use the law and you use it firmly as a lever into treatment, where that might be effective, and you also use services to try to heal where harm has been done, recognising that particularly boys exposed to families where there's family violence may well be the abusers down the track, and we need to pay a lot of attention to how we care for children, boys and girls, perhaps sometimes in somewhat different ways, who have been harmed by the witnessing of violence. I hear from the voices of children I work with just how hurt they are by this.
Dawn, anyone else like to speak?
I mean, it's an incredibly complex area. I think thinking about what is it that I can do, what is it that we can do in communities as families, what is it that organisations can do, and what's it that the system can do that's different, that will change the trajectory. And I think that last point that Dorothy just made about the impact of that trauma of experiencing violence or witnessing violence, there's some amazing work going on. I'm trying to remember, I think with the Benevolent Society, but just how a child who's experienced violence or witnessed violence is not able to just go to school the next day. There needs to be a whole different response, and we need to become much more sensitive to that across all of our systems and services, so that we find that safe space for children, so that they can really recover in a healing way.
Michael, I've got a question here for you. How do you actually make someone accountable unless it's intrinsically motivated from within? Can you actually make someone accountable, or do they have to want to be accountable? I think that's what they're saying. And the second part of the question is, promised neighbourhoods, it's about promised neighbourhoods. What exactly the 10 results and 10 indications actually are. So let's go with the first one, which is the more ethereal of the questions. How do you actually make someone accountable, or do they have to want to be so themselves?
I think people come to work every day and they do things they don't want to do, so I don't really find that particularly challenging. I don't think I can make people do anything. I think I can create conditions by which people find it easier to behave one way over the other. And then I can, through my leadership example, let people understand that, you know, if you do certain things, just is how we will be engaged. And I think this is where, when you set the culture, people know how to relate to you. Just the way when we're supervising our own employees, people understand what they can get away with and what they can do, and they choose every day what they want to do. And I think in a community context, when you set a culture where we've agreed on what we're going to do, and people actually know their contribution, and everyone in that room is accountable for something, that's the price of admission. People behave radically different than when it's just a nebulous conversation that is not grounded in results and it's not grounded in contribution. The biggest problem I find is when people are acting out, it's not because they don't want to give results or contribute, it's because oftentimes we haven't created that container that allows them to experience loss. One of the biggest things I've learned, if I want people to be accountable, is I've got to create the space for them to lose something, to grieve, and step into something else. So for example, this collaborative work requires you're giving up power, you're giving up status, you're giving up being the main one in charge. When I set that container, I better be darn well aware Dawn's playing because she wants to, but she's giving up something. She might feel some kind of way about that. Or she might be totally actualized and doesn't have a problem with it, but somebody will. So to me, that culture of accountability starts with, if I'm trying to lead someone someplace, first of all, I'm leading them by connecting things up to the mental maps that they already have. I'm not asking them to make a fundamental quantum leap without connecting it to their mental schemas. And then secondly, just as much as I'm focused on the work, I'm also focused on the human side of helping to create an environment that allows people to experience loss and step into a new way of being.
What does that mean, experience loss? Does that mean that you'll fire them?
Well, for example, if I'm in an environment where I think I know the way to do something, like I know an approach to collective impact, and I'm in a meeting where I feel like folks don't get it, if you don't create space for me, I'm going to become highly disruptive. And so what I've learned about my own energy is I can change a conversation with what I say. I'll get the whole group off track, right? And so if you bring me into a room and then you don't manage me, you're going to probably have a lot of problems. And that's a perfect example. The loss is I have to do my own work to accept that I'm going to come into community processes where the work is for a community to struggle with it and me not to get the answers. That's the first part. The second is to accept that I am in the room and that I do have some points of view, and to find ways for me to lose my ability to lead out front and to get in line and follow and be a good follower. But you're making space for me to do that. It's not like I'm sitting in a room with a straitjacket for 6 months watching people flounder and never get there. I might do that for 3. You see my point? And so that's what I mean by suffering loss. The loss is I just can't go off and do it. I'm not leading this group. Someone else is. And someone else might be on the journey of trying to figure out how to do that.
Does anyone have any questions to supplement this? Or shall we keep going with the box? Anyone on the panel want to respond to what Michael had to say? Add to it? Ah, good. Man in red shoes.
It's not a summary, it's just another question. Is that okay? So, do you want me to hold it? Okay, alright. So my question is basically, within the whole scheme of what we're here for today, which is having a child-friendly city. An issue that I have, even within this conference, is that and I don't want anyone to start screaming at me, ladies, please. But there is a massive, massive overrepresentation of women within this sector, and I don't have a problem with that, okay? But it's the only issue that I have is that for me as a young man, I'm struggling now to find any kind of man that will be willing to teach me how to do anything. So, you know, from this, every person in this room comes from some way where they're influencing children, and most of the people that are in this room are women. And so, how are we, you know, giving boys, young boys from every age, from what was it, cradle to career? How are we giving boys the chance to, you know, I guess, flourish, learn as men? Because
this is really interesting. What you're saying is not so much that there's an overrepresentation of women, but there's an underrepresentation of men, right? And this is something that's one of my bugbears. No, it's one of my bugbears. And I've been trying to get, this is what I was talking to you about, my sense of loss. I've been trying to get a television show up, which I just found out yesterday won't get up, which is about giving men a voice in a female world and creating new role models for young men that aren't feminised. Let men tell us how feminism has changed being a man, and have male leaders like football coaches talk about what it means to be a man. So there are role models. Yeah, well, the ABC don't want it. They don't want it. They're not interested. They've got a show about gender. It's young girls talking with young girls about what it means to be a woman and disparaging men. Same deal, old-fashioned. It's a really important question. Who are the role models for our young men to be caring and compassionate? It doesn't disparage the female work. It is how do we make it okay for men to be caring and compassionate and take on these roles without women saying you're not being a man, and without men saying what kind of man are you? I don't think men actually are as disparaging of other men doing that as perhaps women with their confused, I still want to be rescued by a prince, but don't fucking tell me what to do. So what do we do about this confused notion of feminism that leaves young men feeling disenfranchised? Slightly off topic, but is that the question? What do we do? Where are the male role models? How do we do it? Yeah?
You know what it's like when you hear a question and this image in front of you is just this minefield?
I just hear a noise.
You know, it's great.
Which is
this
all
is
these
like, you know,
going
the
back
first
up into
step I take answering this question better be the right one, people.
It's a safe
all
place.
I'll say, it's
a
interesting
safe
because
place to
I
answer.
initiated myself like any other young male in this country initiated himself. I jumped my parents' car over a roundabout and hit a telegraph pole, you know. I was lucky enough to walk away. Didn't learn that time, I did a few other ones as well, and they were even more spectacular and even more damaging to me, as I blundered my way through as a young male attempting to initiate myself. So there's another conference here, and Steve Biddulph no doubt will be here, but it is about how we initiate young men and young women in this society, because until we start recognising the transition they need to go through and assist them through that transition, we're going to still end up with these car crashes, both metaphorical and physical. So, but there are men out there. Ross McIver, who runs PCYC here, is looking to get up a program taking adventure-based challenges for disadvantaged youth. And a lot of those will be young men out into the bush. We've got men out there who are willing to step up and ready to step up. Up in Ravenswood, one of the most successful guys that I first met up there was Gavin, PCYC, doing sport up there. Kids were flocking to him, girls and guys. You know, there are role models out there. I think we need to realise it's a priority, and we need to actually make sure they're funded and supported and recognise we need to back these, because we do need to help our men and boys through these situations. And you know what? The way we cope isn't often, we don't have the coping mechanisms that women have and that work sometimes better for them in these situations. Did anything blow up when I answered that?
No, it didn't. Michael, do you notice the same thing?
I would say one of the things I did was I hired a young man that is 22, out of Stanford, named Samuel Sinyangwe. PolicyLink is pretty much majority women, and I had to really make the case for him. First of all, PolicyLink really doesn't hire anyone without having master's degrees, and he's extremely young without having any experience, but that is exactly why I hired him. I did not want him to go somewhere where people were going to beat the maleness out of him, and then he doesn't learn how to do this work. And when I say beat the maleness out of him, here's what I mean. I can't tell you how many meetings I'm in DC where when I get passionate, later it's conversations around, why is he angry? If I question a woman, especially a woman who has not really been around a black male that is not feminized like me, they don't know what to do with this energy. And they're not interested in finding out. It's just that I don't present like what they're comfortable with. I was just in a meeting like that where it was all about, and it comes back to through my staff. Fortunately, I have a good deputy director who's a woman who was like, no, that's not what that is. We're not going to turn this into a conversation about psychoanalyzing Michael's temperament, because that's actually not what it was. What it is he was questioning you, absolutely. You're just not used to seeing passion in this male form. And so my job is I have to really be very mindful of how I walk through the world every day. It's bad enough to have to walk through the world as a black man in America and worry about how people perceive you and take you up. It's equally as important in a very feminized sector to be a black man who is not what I call, necessarily have a softer energy. And so I have to just manage it. The way I manage it at PolicyLink is I make sure that on my team, I'm balancing that out by how I hire. And Samuel Sinyangwe is a perfect example of that. Again, going back to practicing what you preach. Take up your leadership role when you hire. Make these very deliberate attempts to bring people into this sector while they're young and can learn. Because if you don't, I can tell you, most black men in this sector who come off like I do usually end up getting fired. And that's just the reality in the States. I don't know why I'm lucky. One of the reasons why I think I'm lucky is I don't let people interview me. I end up finding places actually where people will support me. So I went to the federal government where, one, it was hard to get fired, so I could say what I wanted to say. But two, I went to PolicyLink very deliberately because PolicyLink is one place where I can talk about race, class, and culture. That's actually our job. Most places I would get fired.
I'm not a man, but can I just say, often...
You're asking permission. You're asking permission. Just lean forward and say it, honey.
You know, often when I'm in conversations with groups who are interested in being part of the Child Friendly Cities work, again, mostly women, and mostly women in the community or social sector, I often say to them that, you know, that one of the things that happens often in these sorts of things is because they are women, they often get marginalised. Oh, it's just the women talking about children again. It's, you know, we all know about that. Let them do that work, right? So to me, the great advantage of having men on your team is that men can speak to men. And I think as women, we need to be really smart about making sure that we embrace more men as part of our collaborations, because if we do become a totally feminised group outside, then often we're not given the opportunities to engage because we don't have those, you know, more male ways of engaging. So, you know, I mean, I think it works both ways. I think it's important because we need to mentor for young men, but I think for ourselves we need to also, as women, understand that we live in a dual-gendered world, and often we're only talking to women about things that are seen as women's work, and we're often dismissed because of that. So it's important both ways.
Dorothy, I can see you thinking, and you've got all this experience you need to bring to this answer.
Well, yes and no, but I was in another state a week before last and really concerned to hear a man working in a men's behaviour change program talk about how unwelcome he had felt, and he had some very clear evidence of that in an organisation which was it was female dominated. I think we're right to reframe it as an underrepresentation of men, but I think we do need to look at the culture of some of our organisations, and I think some of them have been hostile to men being part of the solution and have focused only on men as part of the problem. I remember speaking at a child welfare conference in Melbourne maybe a decade ago, where someone also doing a keynote address described men purely as parasites and perpetrators. Now, I don't think they'd say that today, but I had to get up and say that that's not true. I know that's not true from my own family and my father. That's how basically, primitively, I know that not to be true. So it's valuing fatherhood. It's valuing men in primary schools so that they're not seen in some pejorative light because they wish to teach young children. And sometimes our concern about child sexual abuse has had a legitimate, serious concern, has had unintended consequences in defining what other sorts of roles that men should play, say, in the teaching profession. And in our own community service organisations, I think that many women, and myself included, have struggled at times because we haven't been taught very well to work across the gap of gender. There's the chasm of class and colour and gender that we need to be crossing all the time. And it was brought home to me once when I walked into the driveway of a family, and normally I was happy and the dad was happy if he hid in the shed while I was doing the home visit. You know, I did a sigh of relief, he did a sigh of relief, and it was a good collusive avoidance. But I could see him and he could see me as I walked down the driveway. So I walked down the driveway rather than go to the front door. I spent an hour in the backyard as he explained to me about greyhounds. This was a man who was unemployed. He was emasculated in our culture, where employment and male identity are so fused. He showed me the trampoline he'd created for his kids, the security doors he'd picked up on the tip and he was really selling to his neighbours, and he explained to me about greyhounds. And after an hour in the backyard, we went in the back door, he came with me and sat down and we started talking about his kids with his wife. And I think that women workers in this area need a lot of assistance to transcend very negative stereotypes of men and to feel empowered and supported to work constructively with men. It's not just a job to leave to men. That men and women need to work with men and women.
Male as a second language. I think we've got time for one more question. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add to that little conflict igniter? It was a good question. It's so close to my heart. So close to my heart. What percentage of council budgets, it's for you, are allocated to young people / children in those Australian cities who are accredited as child-friendly? Well, I don't know whether you can...
Well, maybe
you can start and you can collaborate.
And just before I do, I should also really recognise that the Child Friendly Cities initiative, even though I was lucky enough to bring it to council, it came from the Anglicare team, and I know Paul Mallett and his team are here today, and I really want to recognise the fact that it was them coming to brief council about it that gave me the opportunity to then take it to that level. So I really want to recognise Paul and Anglicare for putting that table, and also the Northern Tasmanian Early Years Group and Communities for Children and Council who are working together doing this initiative. It certainly isn't council on our own. It's brilliant work being done by Northern Tasmanian Early Years Group and Communities for Children. I don't know what percentage of our budget is allocated to child and I think it was youth-related activities, and maybe Karen can talk about the rest of Australia. I certainly know that when we were, it was looked at, there used to be a KPMG evaluation of councils around Tasmania about how much each council invested, and we certainly weren't high on that list. It's interesting, local government's often seen as a broker and a facilitator, which we are, we can be brilliantly, but we've also got to be very careful that doesn't excuse us from actually investing directly in it. Though having said that, when I was watching what was being said today about authentic children's voices in cities, I was making my own note. When are we going to have our children's council? I'm thinking, we need 2 a year. We need one for grade 4, 5, 6, and we need one for 12 to 25s as well, in the council chamber, discussing the issues of the city, carrying resolutions, debating, and then let's see, that's when the rubber's going to hit the road, if that actually then feeds into our strategic plan, the things that the children want. So that's when I'm going to get really excited about getting to that step. So it is about money, but I guess it's also about this cultural change in the organisation, doing stuff that actually shows a really clear an authentic recognition, needs to be coupled with resources and budgeting as well.
The idea of budgets is something that a lot of councils really struggle with their child-friendly cities work, and I have to say that one of the challenges is always how you define what's your child-friendly cities program in terms of how you might then write into a budget to say that, oh, this is child-friendly, because a lot of people will say, well, you were doing that anyway, or you'd already allocated that money, or it's going to community and families. Is that really child-friendly work that you're allocating that funding towards? In the same way with projects as well, you know, are these projects that are really part of your child-friendly cities program? That is, you started them and engaged with them because when you looked at the data and you said to yourself, these are the gaps and silences that we need to work on, we then created these projects to deal with those, or were we doing this anyway, we're just diverting and changing the name of it so it fits under this umbrella and it looks like we're doing lots of wonderful things. So there's a real, there's often a real challenge in that. But the cities who are doing very well, and in Australia, again, it's not so clear that that city councils are clearly writing how their budgets are being diverted to whether it's part of the Child Friendly Cities program. But overseas, clearly one of the things that cities have been doing is when they do write a financial budget, and I think this is a really important thing, is they make it transparent and they clearly articulate it in ways that communities can see how money is being spent on children and families and why and how. Because I think it's not so much how much is being spent, it's about the value and the purpose of those budget items and the resources that are put there. So, you know, it's quality rather than quantity, I suppose. And writing the budgets is actually really often very difficult. But councils aren't really that good at being transparent around their budgeting. And so a child-friendly budget is a budget that actually is transparent, not just allocating 30% or 40%. To certain, to what they might allocate as child or community resources or support.
Well, I think that draws to a close this Q&A session. Are there any more questions in the House? No more questions in the House? Well, then I will thank our speakers on the panel. May I ask you to give a warm round of applause, please, to Dr. Michael McAfee, Dawn O'Neill, Professor Karen Malone, Alderman Jeremy Ball, and of course Professor Emeritus Dorothy Scott. Thank you so much for making yourselves available and being so generous with yourselves and your knowledge and your time.